Hello everyone and welcome to the Recitals in Depth. This discussion will bring you deep insights on the science and technology current affairs from the month of May. The broad themes which we are going to cover are: in the first one, we will be covering chemistry, from which we will gain insights on harmful chemicals that have entered into our diet and impacting our ecosystem. We will also read about the chemicals which, on the other hand, can be used as weapons of war. From the biology domain, we will read about various types of microorganisms and hormones and their impact on human health. And we will also make you learn how artificial intelligence can help us understand the biological structures. From the space domain, we have for you the processes that led to the birth of the stars, the supernova, and the universe. We will also read about some of the rocket launches and particle accelerators that can produce intense X-ray lights. So let's get started. So now let's have a quick look into the index. We are going to cover the following topics, which is Bisphenol A, also pronounced as BPA in short, Salmonella Bacteria, liquid nitrogen, and why is it banned by the Tamil Nadu government. Then we will be reading about a very important hormone, Oxytocin, important for dairy production and yield. Then we will read about Chloropicrin, which is basically used as a chemical weapon. Then we will read about goldine, semi-cryogenic pre-burner ignition test article. Then we will read about a very special kind of worm. Then alpha fold 3, then high energy photon source, pre-fire mission, nucleosynthesis, and giant viruses. So even if these topics seem daunting to you, just hold on for a minute and we will dissect everything in a very clear fashion. Starting with the first topic, we have picked up Bisphenol A. Now, Bisphenol A is basically a synthetic chemical. This is not a natural one. It's a synthetic chemical which basically leaches out of certain plastics. When I'm saying certain plastic, it's not found in every plastic. Only in certain plastic. For example, the baby feeder bottles. The water cans that you must have seen. Some of the cans and their closure plastic nib are also made up of BPAs. Some of the receipts, plastic receipts, are composed of BPA. Also, some of the toys consist of BPA. So, not all plastics, but certain plastics. Now, you may ask that how will I identify whether the plastic I have has BPA? Because this is detrimental for the health in longer run. If anybody consumes BPA, Bisphenol A, or such kind of plastic for a longer period of time, then the resultant is that it might affect your endocrine system, also impacting neural health, impacting reproductive health, etc. So then how to identify? We must know that. So let's say that we have got a plastic with us. Now every plastic has got a triangular figure. For example, you can see from this which reflects its recyclability rate. So let's say in this plastic, it is 3. Now, whether it is safe for me or not, I will analyze. Plastics with number 3, with number 6 and number 7 are the ones which can eventually lead to evacuation of the bisphenol A, which is a toxin which can finally disrupt our endocrine system. So basically, not all plastics, but some of them are definitely there. Now talking about the chemical nomenclature, how do you denote bisphenol A? As you can see that it comprises of something named as phenol. So phenol, this is a phenol, and when it is added with acetone, any element or any chemical compound which is having acetone, which suggests to me that such plastics or such a chemical compound is not water soluble. It is not water soluble, but definitely it can be solved, it can dissolve into certain chemical solvents, for example, acetone. But also sometimes when exposed in high temperatures. So when, let's say, a bottle or a container which is containing a plastic of, let's say, number 3, if we introduce hot water into it, then the leakages of bisphenol will start to be triggered. Okay, so now when I added with acetone, which is an organic solvent, then this phenol group, in fact, what will happen? These 2 oxygen bonds will be replaced by the alkyl group, and here we will get 2 phenols. and this is our bisphenol. In fact, the name suggests to me, bis means that something is having occurrence twice in the same molecule. Therefore, twice two phenol molecules are linked by a carbon, and therefore this is known as bisphenol A. This is not present in all the plastics is what we need to remember. Now, when I'm talking about certain types of plastic, then I must also know how many types of plastic are there. Well, there are multiple types of plastic, but prominently we have divided all the plastics into 7 categories based on the degree of recyclability. Now, why is it important for you to understand? Is because in accordance to their degree of recyclability, we will also be able to understand their uses. We will also be able to understand their environmental impact and their impact on the health, which is very important not just for the general knowledge but also for UPSC point of view. Why? Because questions on plastic pollution, questions on these compounds like bisphenol A have already been asked in UPSC examination. Now, talking about the classification, it has been arranged into broadly 7 types on the degree of recyclability, which means the first one, the PET, is the most recyclable, and the last one is the least recyclable, therefore the most detrimental one for the environment. Now, talking about the first one, the PET, or the most simplest form of plastic. This you will be able to see in your basic water bottles, in let's say glasses like this. Now they can very easily be decomposed, and therefore their decomposing rate is very high, and therefore they cause the least impact to the environment. So the degree of recyclability is 36%, more than 30%, in fact highest among these, right? And these are the ones who are also known as polyethylene terephthalate. How much time does it take to decompose? 5 to 10 years only. So which means this is a manageable plastic. Most of the products is created in this plastic only. Now comes the second plastic, which is the high density polyethylene. High density polyethylene has got cyclability rate somewhere less as compared to the polyethylene terephthalate. The property of high density one is that because of the dense molecules, it is highly resistant to chemical erosion. So you can put up chemicals inside such bottles, which ordinarily you won't be using in plastic bottles, right? So when you want to contain phenyl, or let's say Harpic, or let's say a tile cleaner or something like that, you will be choosing these kind of bottles. In fact, to contain shampoos, the plastics that we use are high density polyethylene. Now comes the third plastic, which is one of the biggest menace for the industrialists, for the environmentalists, and for the government. This is the PVC plastic. Why is it a menace? Because it is inherently required for infrastructure. The PVC pipelines for water carrying, all of that is containing the third kind of plastic, which is polyvinyl chloride. It is having one of the least recyclable rate, but at the same time, the percentage which is recycled annually is less than 1%. They are so much prevalent around us that in many of our household things, you will be very easily finding the PVC. For example, the ATM cards you carry, the ATM cards that you carry, they contain of PVC. They won't be degraded very easily. The phone case covers, they are made up of PVCs. The digital pens that you use, they are made up of PVCs. The PVC pipes are there. The toilet seats are made up of PVC. And therefore, PVCs are one of the most difficult ones to be dealt with. And not only that, it's the third numbered one, which means they will eventually be giving us bisphenol A. Okay, next is the low density polyethylene. It's like a cousin of high density polyethylene only, but this one is where this is where you will get your poly bags, your zip bags. Mostly the polythene like these are comprised of LDPE only, low density polyethylene. Now the problem is not the recyclability. Problem with these kind of plastics is their segregation. The reason is, you just now saw a polythene bag, but have you seen those polythene bags which produce a lot of crackling sound? Well, they are not made up of LDPE, they are made up of HDPE. And therefore, when I'm segregating them, I must also know whether they properly belong to LDPE, medium density polyethylene, or high density polyethylene. And the confusion among them kinds of creates problem with their segregation also. So this is the low density polyethylene. Alright, now coming to the next part, which is the polypropylene. Now, polypropylene is that kind of plastic which is extremely difficult, not at all brittle, and it is having very high resistance towards not only brittlity but also towards chemical. So therefore, storing of food, storing of even harder and corrosive elements, and creating certain devices which are waterproof, chemical proof, for example, the camera which is right now recording us, all of these are eventually comprising of polypropylene. Now, after polypropylene, we have polystyrene. Now, this is again one of the most difficult plastics to be dealt with after polyvinyl chloride. Why? Because it becomes very difficult to be recycled. Where do you see polystyrene? Also commonly known as styrofoam. It is present in something like a thermocol box. So what happens with them is it is highly brittle. It can be further degraded into microplastics. And microplastics creates another class of menace to be dealt with, and therefore it enters the food chain the most easily. And even the worst, when degraded, it also produces bisphenol A. So this is also a culprit of producing bisphenol A. And then comes the most difficult part of our seven classification of plastic. There could be a lot of plastics into this which are not much used, they are not very commonly used, but yes, they can also generate BPA. So this is basically a quick classification of all the plastics around us so that you get more educated on them. Now, the core of solving the plastic management problem lies in two or three things. First of all, plastic segregation. Plastic segregation. First of all, we have to understand which type of plastic is to be dealt with and what is the degradable rate. You should also know what is a single-use plastic? Single-use plastic which has been banned in India. Single-use plastic is nothing but the low-density polyethylene. Low-density polyethylene because it takes more than 500 and up to 1000 years to get decomposed. And therefore, this has been banned by the government. So, some of the things which we have to take care of is the elimination, proper segregation, waste management and proper collaboration, which takes us to the next topic, which is again important for UPSC, that is, what is the plastic pollution scenario in India? Now, if you talk about the scope of plastic pollution, well, India is the second largest consumer of plastic annually. In fact, the amount of plastic that we produce and consume on an yearly basis is as large as 9 million metric tons. And out of this, the glaring situation is this: only 60%, even after having so many plastic reforms, we are only able to manage or recycle or eliminate 60% of the total plastic. So then what happens with the rest 40% of the plastic? It basically enters into the land ecosystem, the marine ecosystem, the river ecosystem, etc. And therefore eventually entering into inside our food chain. Now, so obviously, what will be the impact? The impact, first of all, will be on the immediate consumers of these plastics. So, who are the immediate consumers of these plastics? First of all, the marine organisms, the smaller land organisms or terrestrial organisms. It can also enter into avian organisms. And when it enters into these smaller organisms, because of the nature of our food chain, it eventually gets bioaccumulated into higher organisms, including humans. So now can you see that just because a plastic or a chemical out of plastic has leached outside in the ecosystem, it can enter into almost all the organisms of the ecosystem. So definitely having detrimental impact because this not only disrupts with our hormones, the endocrine system, but also with our reproductive health, but also causes non-communicable diseases like cancers because it contains toxins, right? So it has got health impact. Is health impact the only one? No. It also impacts the economy, especially of the people who are directly dependent upon these immediate consumer of these plastics, which are, let's say, the fishes or the crops in which such toxins must have got penetrated. So the most vulnerable sections of the agriculture of the economy, which is the agriculture sector, the fishery sector. These farmers will eventually get into the trouble because their products will now have a lot of leached toxins in them, right? The next one is not only economy, it also has got climatic impacts. Why climatic impacts? Plastic itself is not a pollutant, but when it is not managed well, let's say we have got huge stockpiles, lot of landfills, and in those landfills, if they are there for a very long period of time without proper recycling, they will start leaching the toxin into the ground, right? So first of all, the landfills, the waste of the plastic will cause leaching. And now let's say I really want to decompose it by following a process, for example, incineration, where I'm trying to burn the plastic. Then what will happen? It will give out gases which could be polluting in nature or can even emit the greenhouse gases, eventually leading to global warming. So therefore, it can also lead to global warming because of the gases produced. Are the health, economic and climate impact enough? No. We therefore also have a social impact, a social cost of using plastics unnecessarily. The social cost comes from multitude of factors, but most importantly, the weight creates disparity among different countries. The developed countries, who are basically the largest consumers of plastic, they try to dump their plastic waste into some smaller countries in lieu of some credit or some money. But end of the day, the smaller countries, the people of island nation, are the ones who are paying the cost of this plastic treatment, and therefore it also creates social disparity. Now, if I want to deal with all of these multi-dimensional problems and impact, I need multi-dimensional intervention as well. So where will my intervention start from? First of all, it will start from elimination of the plastics. And the elimination, especially, I cannot eliminate all of the plastic because plastic is very useful also. But at the same time, can I eliminate the plastic? Which is taking the longest of the time to get decomposed? Yes. And which are those kinds of plastic? These were the low density polyethylene, also known as single-use plastics, right? So, India has already eliminated. It's been exactly 2 years since that has been effected. It happened in 1st of July 2022. So, India has banned it already. This is one of the government intervention. The second is, if I cannot eliminate the rest of them, can I create alternatives? Yes. There can be paper bag, there can be cloth bag. So, does government put any intervention in this regard? Absolutely yes. So, we have got Vikalp Store. By the Delhi government, and we've also got Tamil Nadu government, which is basically providing and distributing cloth bags so that it can provide a very affordable alternative of the plastics. Now, coming to more legislative reforms taken by India. So, we also want plastic management. So, how do I start the management of plastic? First of all is door-to-door collection, and second is their segregation. For that, who will take the responsibility of collection and segregation? It should be the responsibility of the producer itself. So, what we call that in India? We call it as extended producer responsibility, something that has been asked by UPSC. So, this is known as extended producer responsibility, where the producer of plastic or the product containing plastic is itself responsible for the entire life cycle of the plastic, in fact, till the extent of collecting the waste as well. So, this comes under extended producer responsibility under the plastic waste management rules formulated in 2016. A very important question from the examination point of view. Now, when I talk about the management, should I also not talk about the transboundary movement, because I've already told you this problem happens? So, in order to ensure that the transboundary movement of hazardous materials, for example, plastics, won't take place, we have got Basel Convention. Of 1989. Now, this basically regulates the transboundary movement of the hazardous element. Again, when I'm talking about the management, should I also not ensure the plastics are not getting dumped on the marine environment, on the oceanic resources, because that's very important. That has been one of the reasons why we can see the Great Pacific Garbage Patch or GPGB. Okay, contain all of the plastic of the world, most of the plastic contained under the ocean gyres of the mid-Pacific Ocean. So for that, we also need to ensure that there is containment of plastics so that they are not dumped into the oceans. And for that, we have got London Convention, which was adopted in 1972, so that it doesn't get dumped into marine environment. And last but not the least, do I also need to cater with the greenhouse gases that are getting emanated out of the segregation and the disposal mechanisms of plastics? For example, incineration we just talked about. So for that, in order to eliminate plastics from generating additional greenhouse gases, we have got something which we know as the International Plastic Treaty, which has been formulated in 2024, and it is a legally binding treaty in its nature. Okay, so when I will be able to take all these interventions, not just by pen and paper, but also in the ground reality, I will be able to deal and target the plastic menace, because anyway, we are running through the decade of ecosystem restoration, and the main thing that we need to do is to literally restore our Mother Earth. And one of the menace that she faces is of plastic. So I hope this entire concept is clear to you. Now bringing you to the UPSC question. UPSC in the Prelims 2024 asked a very simple question. It has been a hot topic, therefore one of the key topics of our discussion as well. BPA, the cause of concern, is a key component in which of the following kinds of plastic, and therefore I told you the entire classification of plastic. Now you try to answer it for us. Okay? Now our next topic is a kind of bacteria which is one of the main causes of foodborne illnesses across the world. This is the Salmonella Bacteria. Now, as you know, bacteria can be classified into multiple types, basically depending upon their shapes. So there could be coccus bacteria, which are spherical in shape. There could be rod or bacillus bacteria, which are rod in shaped, or there could be spiral shaped bacteria as well, generally with the prefix of Vibrio or pylori. Okay, so these are the different classifications of bacteria. Why are we reading about Salmonella bacteria here? Because the context is US government has recently taken very stringent measures against the food that they have imported, and they have to be found contaminated by the Salmonella bacteria. So talking about the Salmonella bacteria, first of all, let's understand the characteristics. This is a rod-shaped bacteria, which means it comes under the category of this bacteria, the same one which is responsible for causing anthrax, same one which is responsible for causing typhoid and botulism. So this is a rod-shaped bacteria. The next characteristic, in fact a chemical characteristic, is that it is a gram-negative bacteria. Now you will ask, ma'am, what is gram-negative and how does it matter whether we know it's a gram-negative or positive? Okay, for understanding that, let's take a sample of bacteria, and in order to understand the nature of the bacteria, what I need to do? I need to stain it so that when I'll be viewing under the microscope, the smaller cells will become more visible to me. You must be doing this in your biological classes with the help of your onion tissues, etc. In a very similar way, we also test the bacteria here. So you take a gram stain, and then you basically stain the bacteria over there. If the bacteria is coming out purple in color, is getting stained by the purple color, then this is a gram positive bacteria, purple color. The reason of this is the stain was not feeling a lot of resistance in staining this bacteria. Basically, the cell wall was not that strong, right? So therefore, this is a purple stained bacteria, gram positive. On the other hand, a different kind of bacteria would not get stained in a purple color. Why? Because of the strength of the cell wall, it won't allow the stain to penetrate much deeper, and as a result, you will get a pink stain. Now, the key point over here is the nature of the cell wall. If the cell wall is stronger, my bacteria, which might be causing certain pathogenesis inside my body, it becomes difficult to be dealt with. The antibodies or the antibiotics will not be able to fight with such kind of bacteria easily. So therefore, the larger bacteria, which are one of the most menace, are belonging to the gram-negative sector only, which means this comes under the category of being a harmful bacteria. This is a harmful bacteria. All right. Now, the second thing is, what is the transmissional source and how does it impact a person or impact another organism? So, these bacteria basically find their source of contamination inside the gastrointestinal tract of the human body or any organism for that matter. So, basically it enters us via the oral fecal route. Okay, oral fecal route, finally colonizing the intestine, the walls of the intestine, large intestine and the small intestine, as you can see. So basically it enters with the help of certain food which is contaminated, water which is contaminated, or in fact also by being in contact with somebody who's already suffering from a disease caused by this bacteria. So the disease which is caused by this bacteria is known as salmonellosis. Okay, so people who generally consume such food, contaminated food, they get into this disease, and therefore it becomes very difficult for the entire country to deal with such a disease. And therefore it is one of the causes of concern when we talk about maintaining the phytosanitary standards in our trade. Because the one which causes the most problem in these phytosanitary measures is the allegation of salmonella contamination into the food shipments, for example, spices, rice, etc. Okay. Now, transmissional source is our gastrointestinal tract. It can then be ejected out using feces, and then it can get propagated into land, into water, into air, basically all of the environment, and then when it is consumed by a person, directly or indirectly, it contaminates or colonizes his intestine as well. This is how the entire propagation happens. So this is communicable in nature. The second one, the pathogenesis or the disease that it causes by colonizing the intestine is known as salmonellosis, which I have already told. Next is, what are the symptoms? Now, I have already told you that this is a rod-shaped bacteria. It shows kind of similarity between typhoid. So, some of the things which you can be seeing in typhoid, for example, feeling diarrhea, feeling vomiting, fever, that can occur in this also. But you can also see blood in the stool. These are some of the characteristics which can make us identify whether a person is suffering from this salmonellosis or not. Now, why is this problematic? I will show you with the help of a data. So, it was found by the US government department that out of the total people who were affected by the Salmonella bacteria, 89% of them died. Not that we do not have preventive measures, not that we do not have the medicines for it, but still then, the contagion rate was so high that it caused 89% of the death. And in fact, in many cases, the symptoms were so confusing that people didn't even approach the doctors or the health facilities. So therefore, it becomes one of the most prominent foodborne illnesses across the world. Now, when we are talking about the bacteria, we should also know, are all bacteria bad? Bacteria are one among the organisms, microorganisms, but not all of them are bad. In fact, some of them can be utilized in also augmenting and supporting our digestive system. For example, the curd that you use. So, that contains lactobacillus. Now, when I'm saying it contains bacillus bacteria, what will be the shape of this bacteria? Please write down in the comments. Then, our antibiotics are made up of bacteria only. Then some of the bacteria also helps us to produce the vitamins. Some of the bacteria who are genetically modified can provide us better health outcomes as well. So GMOs will also be there, which are used to make insulins and other useful food products and compounds. Then it can also help us to fix the carbon and nitrogen cycle. So please remember, bacteria are also good in nature and they are also harmful in nature because they can cause multitude of disease. Let's have a look into them because it's important for the examination point of view. So the disease caused by bacteria, if we very closely look into them, first is whooping cough. Whooping cough, which is caused by pertussis. So this disease is also known as pertussis. Is it included in our Indradhanush plan? Yes. Then diphtheria. Diphtheria is caused by another bacterium named diphtheria. Is this included? Yes, because they are chronic in nature. Next is cholera. Cholera is caused by Vibrio cholerae. Now you tell me, what will be the shape of this bacteria? What will be the shape of this bacteria? Next, leprosy is caused by bacteria. Pneumonia is again caused by Streptococcus pneumoniae. What will be the shape of this bacteria? Think about it. Next is the tetanus, the typhoid, the tuberculosis and the plague. All of these deadly diseases are caused by bacteria. Okay, so these were some of the bacteria. We kind of have an entire overlook on what is Salmonella bacteria, what is the pathogenesis which is caused by it, what is the transmission route, and why it is a problem for the trade across the world. Okay, so have you eaten a smoke ice cream or a smoke pan? Well, if you have eaten, you won't be eating after this discussion. The context of reading liquid nitrogen is that Tamil Nadu government has recently banned the use of liquid nitrogen in the food products except for the packaged food. What made them do so? We will read it over here. First of all, to understand that, please understand the characteristics of liquid nitrogen. Characteristic, as you can see, it is colorless, it is odorless. Is it toxic? No, it is non-toxic. Therefore, it was very prevalently used in some of the fancy food items like pan and ice cream. What is the production process? Production process is very similar as that of creating water out or ice out of water. So basically, you use the nitrogen gas, then you compress nitrogen gas which is having far off molecules. You try to compress these molecules with the application of a very high pressure and also low temperature. Low temperature will enhance or decrease basically the distances between two molecules, which is also known as entropy. So as a result of this product will become more compact and this will lead to a state which is the liquid state or the liquefied state. So the process of production is known as liquefaction of nitrogen gas. If it is the same gas, why am I not using the gas and why am I using the nitrogen or the liquid nitrogen? Because you must know that liquid nitrogen as a gas itself is very inert in nature. It is one among those gases which you can find in your Lay's chips, on your Kurkure packs, etc. The reason for this is it is a very good preservative. Why nitrogen gas is a preservative? First of all, it is inert, which means it doesn't really react with the components in which it is mixed with. The second reason is this, that it kind of eats away the oxygen in which it lives. Why does it eat away the oxygen? Because of its high level of vaporization. So it basically disposes of the oxygen molecule, replaces them with the nitrogen. And as a result, it reduces the rate of adulteration. So if you want to keep something stored for a longer period of time, you want to keep it cool for a longer period of time, you would be requiring the nitrogen gas. But in case of nitrogen gas, as you can see, the molecules are very far off each other, so they will start escaping out. They can only be stored inside the container, otherwise they will start escaping out. The result won't be fine. So therefore, in order to contain it more, we liquefy them and convert it into liquid nitrogen, which is now getting misused by many of the people. Now, liquid nitrogen is not just bad. It has found multitude of applications because of its properties. First, we'll understand the property. First property is its very, very low boiling point. The low boiling point is at minus 196 degrees Fahrenheit, which means that it can keep itself very, very cool and also keep the mixtures which is basically added inside it very, very cool. So therefore, it also is workable with the cryogenic temperatures. In fact, it is used to create the cryogenic temperatures and therefore it is utilized by the researchers whenever they want to look up into the behavior of materials and the substances at a very low temperature. They can also be used in cryogenic engines, which we will be studying in the rocket launches. Okay. So first of all is its low boiling point. Second is it is non-reactive. I already told that it is an inert chemical. under low temperatures. So therefore, it is compatible to be used with materials, for example, chemicals, metals, plastics, etc. Okay, it will also thus prevent the leaching also. Next is, it is helpful in cryogenic preservation. Cryogenic preservation, not just of the food material, but also very sensitive things, for example, tissues, for example, cells of an organism. So it also helps in cryogenic preservation. Now, talking about the health implications and why you shouldn't be consuming smoke pans and smoke ice cream, which consists of liquid nitrogen, is first of all, because it has this tendency of creating extremely low pressure and low temperature. Therefore, it can have cold burns, or it can get you frostbite, which can eventually lead to creation of hole inside the stomachs. In fact, it has been one of the news of late. It was covered that a 12-year-old girl gets hole in her stomach after eating liquid nitrogen pan in Bangalore. This is a real case study, and therefore Tamil Nadu government has took this step. Now, second one is asphyxiation hazard. I've already told you this is oxygen eater. Whenever you impose or induce a lot of nitrogen gas inside a closed room, it will start eating away the oxygen, which will eventually render, though it is good for keeping the food unadulterated, but it is bad for the human beings or for the organisms who depend on oxygen gas for their survival. So this can also lead to suffocation and eventually death due to lack of oxygen in the surrounding. So these are some of the safety considerations which must be taken care of before consuming anything which is related to or containing liquid nitrogen. Well, do you know that India is one of the largest producers of milk, but also one of the largest abusers of an hormone which is known as oxytocin, which basically increases the milk yield or lactation in the cattle. The hormone that we are talking about is the oxytocin, also known as the feel-good or the happy hormone. This hormone is not just synthetically produced, but also naturally produced inside the organisms. And it is the one which is responsible for our social bondings, feeling good impact, and having proper lactation and reproductive processes. So when we are talking about the oxytocin, let's understand under which context we are reading it. So very recently, the Delhi High Court has put up their concerns regarding the abuse of oxytocin which is still being used in the cattle today, which amounts to animal cruelty. Why this amounts to animal cruelty? Because it leads to a lot of diseases. You must have already heard about the lumpy skin disease, which the cattle of our India are having. Could be, not prominently, but could be one of the reasons of using oxytocin, because oxytocin can cause rashes, can cause swelling and a lot of allergic reactions, and also it disrupts the endocrine system of the cattle. So when we are talking about the oxytocin, which is a neurotransmitter and a hormone, one question should also come to your mind. When it is naturally produced in our body, how is it causing ill impacts in our cattle? The problem is not the natural dosage of oxytocin into the body, but the synthetic induction of oxytocin in higher levels in order to have more lactation, in order to have more amount of milk yield. So the oxytocin, which is a neurotransmitter, it basically is created by the hypothalamus gland. Then it is stored in our pituitary gland. And finally, because this is an endocrine gland, which means the glands which are responsible for emitting out hormones directly into the bloodstream. They do not require any arteries, any veins, any pipes. Therefore, they are also known as ductless glands or ductless hormones. So they are created. They are created in hypothalamus, and they are finally reduced. They are finally induced by the pituitary glands, and it is there in all the mammals. Now, can it be used in India? It's a very shocking fact, which you'll be surprised to know, that since 2018, India has completely banned the use of synthetic induction of oxytocin, especially into the cattle. So it has been banned and still getting abused in some of the cattle, which amounts to animal cruelty. Now, talking about the oxytocin, you must know that it can be created in both the manners, natural manner and synthetic manner. The natural dosage is completely fine. It is responsible for uterine contraction, which leads to finally creation of motherhood processes. Second is lactation, and third finally is social bonding. Social bonding between the mother and the infant, and of course the overall social bonding, because it is one of the happy hormones, the feel-good hormones. So this is about the oxytocin. You should also know when it is induced artificially into a cattle, what happens is it generally relaxes the muscle more than average inside this mammal, inside the cattle, and eventually in the longer run creates infertility. And not just that, in the shorter run, it also creates a lot of skin disease in the mammal. And therefore, it is banned in India. Now, let's pick up from the basics and study about hormones. What are hormones? These are the chemical messengers which take care of the control and coordination of the human body. They are produced by something which is known as endocrine gland. Endocrine gland are those set of organs which releases these chemical messengers, basically produces them and transmits them directly into the bloodstream and not inside any blood vessel. Therefore, this is known as a ductless mechanism. Now, talking about the different kind of endocrine glands, we'll begin with the first one, that is the pineal gland, and the most important one. Pineal gland is just beneath this area, and this is responsible for secreting a hormone which is known as melatonin. Melatonin hormone is responsible for regulating your sleep cycle and your wake cycle. So people who struggle with sleepiness or excess of it or lack of it, they are generally advised to take the melatonin dosages. Now, how does it work? So let's say you have closed the eyes, you can still have some sense of the light around you. But the moment you put a hand over here, that is close your pineal gland, you will ultimately feel a darkness. And this is how it is able to manage your circadian rhythm. When are you sleeping and when are you waking up? This is the pineal gland releasing the melatonin. Okay. The next one is hypothalamus. Now, hypothalamus is responsible for basically creating all of the happy hormones that can basically also make you addicted to something. For example, serotonin, oxytocin, your dopamine, etc. They are created by hypothalamus. Next is the pituitary gland, which is again very important. It is located at the base of your brain, but this is the master gland because this one gland is able to manage all of the other glands. It is able to trigger and stop the responses of hormone secretion amongst all of the other glands. So therefore, this is known as a master gland. So it is not only responsible for your stress management, but for your growth, metabolism, all of that is eventually triggered by pituitary. When we are talking about oxytocin, it was produced by hypothalamus, but secreted by pituitary into the bloodstream. The next one is the thyroid gland. Thyroid is located somewhere here below the Adam apple. Now, thyroid gland is responsible for creating or for emanating T3 and T4 hormones. It basically produces T3 in 80%. So, this thyroid hormone is eventually responsible for regulating all of your growth, especially some of the parameters which are immediately evident. For example, the heart rate, the oxygen level, all of that is managed by the thyroid. But most importantly, the level of growth and development is determined by the thyroid gland only, which also secretes another hormone which is known as calcitonin. Calcitonin is responsible for enabling or basically managing the calcium levels of your body. So this is the thyroid. Next one, just beneath your heart is the thymus gland. Now, thymus gland, as you can see, it is bilobed in nature. This one is responsible for providing you immunity. And this is one of those glands which eventually become smaller and smaller once you age. So when I'm talking about the immunity, what it does, it leads to the secretion of T cells in the body. So T for T cells and T for thymus. So you will be able to relate immunity with it. The next one that we have are the pancreas. We have other glands also as well, but I'll be covering the important ones. So next is the pancreas. So pancreas are leaf-like glands which are located beneath the stomach. So pancreas are able to create and regulate the sugar levels inside the body with the help of two hormones. You have the name already, insulin and glucagon. So insulin has got property to reduce the amount of excess sugar in the body. So this hormone is released by the beta cells of the islets of Langerhans. And the second hormone that is produced is glucagon. Because what if your body is deficient of the sugar levels, then we need to trigger the sugar more into the body, and that is done by the alpha cells, which are present where? This is present in the pancreas. Alright, the next important one and a very important one to manage the stress is the adrenal gland. Adrenal glands, as the name suggests, renal stands for kidney, and they are adrenal, which means they are located at the top bases of both the kidneys. These are the adrenals which are responsible for producing hormones, for example cortisol, for example your adrenaline and noradrenaline. So basically these are the fight and flight hormones. Fight and flight hormones. What do? They give immediate responses out of your body, mostly involuntary reactions. For example, enhancing your heart rate or inducing more amount of oxygen so that you can breathe better, making your muscles more relaxed whenever you feel tensed. So the release of cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline are done by adrenal glands. Okay. The reproductive glands includes ovary, placenta, uterus, testes, and one of the important glands is kidney. Kidney is also a gland which releases something which manages calcium in the body, something which manages the blood or the RBCs in the body. So anyway, not moving much deeper into it, you know the idea about the major endocrine glands of the human body. Now, you remember I said that oxytocin is a happy hormone. So, how many happy hormones are there in human body? Broadly 4. We have got oxytocin, we have got serotonin, we have got dopamine, and we have got endorphin. Now, let's take a case study for you to understand it better, because I feel it's important for the UPSC aspirants to know the science of whatever goes in our head in a much better way, in a more biological manner. So let's say that you gave an exam and unfortunately you failed in the exam. You will start feeling an utter immense kind of pain. You would require something to kill that pain. What it would be? No, it's not alcohol. It would be something that can release endorphin in your body, and which is laughing out loud, exercising, going to the gym, consuming dark chocolate, smelling essential oils, because all of them are scientifically proven to induce endorphin in the body, which is a very natural, prominent painkiller. Now, let's say you have finally thought about restarting the preparation again. Now, when you will be doing it, you first of all require to stabilize your mood a little bit. So, what is a mood stabilizer hormone? Because many of us start feeling a lot of mood swings here and there. How to stabilize the mood? By stabilizing the amount of serotonin in the body. What are the best sources of stabilizing serotonin? First of all is sunlight. Second is meditating. Then exercise and being in nature. In fact, you will very naturally find an affiliation towards going in nature or towards, meditating, or you'll feel good in sun exposure because you might be serotonin deficient. So these are the mood stabilizers. Now finally, when your mood is stabilized, now you would like to pick up your books. When you're picking the books, at many a times you start feeling the stress of completing the target. So now comes something which will be able to release off your stress. This is the love hormone that you can feel from your dear and near ones. This is released by oxytocin. So for example, you play with your dog, or you hug your mother, or you play with a baby. All of them finally produces oxytocin in the body. And finally, when you will be able to finish up your target, you will feel an immense sense of positive motivation. That is not motivation. That is the dopamine you have got, which is a rewarding chemical, which is attained once you complete any task. So, doing self-care activities, celebrating your little wins, therefore, learning how to appreciate our micro wins is one of the major chapters of psychology as well. And this is why, because it induces dopamine into the brain. And this reward system eventually creates a virtuous cycle of us doing more targets, which can bring us these micro wins. So these are the happy hormones, and these are some of the ways in which we can get them. Do you know what is chloropicrin? Chloropicrin is a chemical warfare agent. It is not only a warfare agent which was used for the first time by both the Allied and Axis power in World War I, but also a farmer's friend, because it can also be treated as a pesticide, herbicide, etc., because it can also kill the toxicity or the organic substances. So when we are talking about the chloropicrin, how does it look like? Chloropicrin is basically a synthetic element. It doesn't occur in nature. It's a synthetic element which comprises of carbon nitromethane compound. Can we create this? Yes. So it is a carbon nitro compound. and methane. So which means we are creating a methane here. But is this chloropicrin? No, because I can't find chloro or chlorine over here. So when I can replace the hydrogen with chlorine or with chloride, then now this entire product will become my chloropicrin. It is a synthetic substance, which means there will be certain formative processes. So how to create chloropicrin? It's just an interesting thing, that's why I'm telling you. So first of all, how do you replace this hydrogen with chlorine? By introducing something which can bring us potential and good amount of chlorine, and that could be bleach. So bleach, which is basically sodium hypochlorite, has got a very strong chlorine compound in it, very reactive one. So when I introduce 3 molecules of bleach along with this carbon nitromethane, this chlorine will be able to replace all the hydrogen molecules and therefore creating chloropicrin. The second process, if you talk, let's say I have got something which comprises of 3 chlorine already. Then I just need nitric acid, HNO3. I just need nitric acid. How does nitric acid look like? It looks like something like this. And this is what I already want. So I will just replace this hydroxy group and combine it together. Again, I'm getting what? I'm getting chloropicrin. So there are 2 formation processes as to how we can create, one using bleach, second using chloroform. But one thing is very important to know. The properties of chloropicrin, which leads it to be used as a chemical weapon or for chemical warfare. So what are the properties? Let's have a look. So now let's have a look into its characteristic. One of the most important thing is it's not very easily identifiable because it is colorless, but sometimes it can also turn into yellowish white in nature, but broadly it's a colorless gas. Second, does it emanate odor or not? Yes, it has a very pungent odor, a very irritating odor to the extent that it can induce vomiting sensations. It is also having lacrimator properties, which means it can induce tears in the eyes, which can create a lot of irritability, and eventually for the people who are there in the war or who might be creating riots, etc., they will finally not be able to see because of the tears coming. So that is why these are some of the reasons why it can be used as a chemical weapon. The context of this particular topic is that US government has recently accused Russia of using this particular chloropicrin against Ukraine, which is against a very important treaty, a binding treaty, which is the Chemical Weapon Convention. More about that on the later slide. But you must understand this is how it gets used in the chemical warfares. The first time it was used was in World War I. It was used by both the Allied and the Axis powers. Now, talking about the characteristics, you must also know their health impact. As I've already told you, they can introduce a lot of tears. When the soldiers knew about this, they started using masks. But what happens is, it also penetrates inside the mask and it induces vomiting sensation even without you inhaling them. So it induces vomiting sensation to that extent that the soldiers eventually started removing their mask off, eventually inhaling most of this gas. Inhaling a lot of gas in the longer extent can be carcinogenic, can create cancers in the body, and is obviously very toxic to the organs. Now, the very fact that it is toxic to the organs is why it can be a farmer's friend, because it can be naturally used as a fuming agent. Why do we call it as a fuming agent? Because when it is applied on the soil, it starts emanating out as vapors. It starts creating a lot of vapors. Now, this vapors will have more diversity, so naturally you will be requiring more coverage. So naturally you will be requiring lesser amount of chloropicrin, and this lesser amount you will be able to kill majority of the herbicides and the insecticides. Right? But of course, it is not natural in nature, synthetic in nature. So of course, it can bioaccumulate in the ecosystem and reach our body as well. That is another discussion. But it has got agricultural uses as well, is something I wanted to tell. Next is our discussion on the chemical weapons. Chemical weapons is the use of chemicals in order to intentionally cause harm or even death of the opponents or of the people. This chemical weapon is completely prohibited, and this was made into effect by the Chemical Weapon Convention, which was signed in 1997, and it is legally binding. Most of the countries have already signed this convention. And Russia, the one who has used chloropicrin, was also signatory of this treaty. So talking about the chemical weapons, it's not a new thing. In fact, some of the evidences have been found in our ancient texts, for example, Ramayana and Mahabharata. In fact, during modern dynasty there, and in fact, in many of the other places, for example, Greek dynasties, the ancient Greek, they used to use the poisoned arrows, which are nothing but one of the sorts of chemical warfare only. Not only that, in The Art of War, written by the Chinese philosopher Sun Tzu, he has also mentioned the use of arsenic smokes in order to defeat their opponents with the help of chemical interventions. Of course, it can cause a lot of health implications and environmental implications. That is why it is completely banned, and still it was abused. So now let's talk about the Safeguarding Treaty, which is the Chemical Weapon Convention. Now this was launched in 1997. Do you know when was Biological Weapon Convention launched? Do you know when this was launched? This was launched in 1975, even before Chemical Weapon Convention came into play. Not that 1997 was the one when a lot of chemicals were getting used. In fact, in the World War I, World War II, lot of chemical weapons, for example, the very famous mustard gas, chlorine gas, some of the halogen compounds, for example, chloroacetone, bromoacetate, all of them were used in World War I and World War II. And we already had some of the promising treaties back then to safeguard, but then they were flouted left, right and center during world wars. Then we finally became more serious about the use of chemical weapons in 1997. About 192 states and 195 signatories, India being one of the signatories, have finally joined this legally binding Chemical Weapon Convention. Under this convention, they have to follow the following mandate. First of all, you have to completely destroy the old and the abandoned chemical weapons. And what about the new ones? Can you create them? No. Second is, they have to declare riot control agents, which are known as tear gas. One of the tear gas is chloropicrin. So, riot control agents have to be declared, whichever they have in their possession. The next one is, it is organized or it is administered by Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, which is OPCW. What does it prohibit? It prohibits any kind of further development, production, acquisition, stockpiling, retention and whatnot of the chemical weapons. Second, it also prohibits some of the other states to indulge in the activities which are prohibited, or basically to assist the other states. For example, let's say a small country, let's say a country like Mauritius is not having chemical weapons. Now, can India help Mauritius in creating chemical weapons? No, because India is signatory to it. So, you cannot even assist any other state to create chemical weapons. Next, using riot control devices as warfare methods is also prohibited under Chemical Weapon Convention. So, I hope it is clear to you. Now, we will move on to the next topic, which is again very interesting one. Before that, I want you to solve this PYQ of 2020. It was heavily based on current affairs, but can we tell which among the following deal with the biological and the chemical weapons and the prohibition of the same? Is it the Alma-Ata, the Hague Convention, the Talanoa or the Under 2 Coalition? Just answer which one of the following has the subject of refraining biological, prohibiting biological and chemical weapons. So please answer in the comment box. Do you know that very recently, the researchers of Sweden have discovered a very fascinating material which has got the best of both, gold and graphene. This is the goldine. Goldine, which is also named as world's first 2D metal. When you heard about 2D, as you can see that it is arranged in only one thin sheet. Therefore, this is a 2D metal. When we talk about the 2D material, one of the most prominent ones which must be striking your mind is graphene. Graphene is one of the allotropes of carbon, where entire carbon molecules are arranged in hexagonal dimension in a complete plain sheet, right? And it has got extremely beautiful and great conductive properties. Therefore, it is used as semiconductors and it is used a lot in the electronic industries. Question on graphene was also asked in UPSC. So that's why goldine also becomes important for us. You must also know that ever since the creation of graphene, which was done in the year 2004, in the year 2004, when graphene was created, After that, a lot of two-dimensional materials were created. What was the requirement? Basically, it requires less of the bulk material, and at the nanoscale when it is created, it acts as a better catalyst, it acts as a better conductor and whatnot. So therefore, in order to make anything more commercially viable, better, and to be more precise in operation, we require what we call as 2D materials. But this is for the first time when a metal has been fabricated into a 2D form, and therefore this is world's first 2D metal, which is goldine. It looks something like this. This is not your dairy milk sheet. This is a goldine. Now, talking about the goldine, why gold as a metal only was used? The first property which gold has is that it is inert in nature. When I call something inert, which means it is not highly reactive. That is why it's one of the most precious metals, because it has a very long lasting property. It doesn't just react with any chemical or any other environmental factor. That is gold for you. The second thing, it is highly malleable in nature. Malleable is a virtue of any metal to get created into thinnest of the sheets. Therefore, it is used in creating jewelry. And second, it is one of the highest ductile metal, which means it can be created into very, very thin wires as well, right? So highly moldable. So why can't we use it in the electronics industry? Because what it doesn't have is a good conductivity. And it doesn't have a good conductivity because of its bulkiness, because of the dense nature of the gold. So what if I basically alter the structure of the gold in such a manner that it kind of simulates the structure of graphene, which itself is a very good conductor of electricity, right? So therefore, gold has been chosen. The second thing is, gold has a very unique property when it acts at nano levels. At nanoscale, it starts acting as a very good catalyst. Catalyst means anything which can expedite or increase the speed of any reaction. So whenever you want to create any reaction, for example, production of hydrogen, we used to use platinum. It was there in the last recitals. And now you can also use this goldine because it acts as a very good catalyst also. So it can be used for creating a lot of products, a lot of water purification applications, etc. And at the micro scale, when it is created at a micro scale, what happens? It acts as a very good semiconductor. So therefore, our effort is to reduce the structure of gold and create it into micro scale so that its conductivity can be enhanced. How will you be able to create it? So first of all, you will take a base material. This material is like a ceramide in the form of titanium carbide, TiC3. So a titanium carbide is taken first of all. The second thing I do is induce silicon into it, so that what I get is titanium silicon carbide. Now I am getting titanium silicon carbide. Can you see that I have infused between titanium a lot of silicon elements, a lot of silicon molecules. Now what I do, I will start depositing gold from the top. This gold will start permeating inside and it will react with these silicon molecules and remove the silicon molecules out of the structure and get bedded in the place of silicon modules. Now I have already arranged the entire gold in the form of silicon arrangement. But the trouble is, how will I reduce and how will I remove this titanium carbide? This can be done with the help of Murakami agent. You don't need to remember all of this, but just enjoy the learning. Murakami reagent is responsible for removing all of the titanium carbide. So you're just left with a structure, a 2D structure of goldine. This is how the entire process of preparation takes place, and finally you get what? You get world's first 2D metal. Now what are the properties of goldine? What is the color of goldine? It is as same as gold, so color is gold. What is the size? Now size is not as same as a typical gold. It is about 400 times lesser in size and lesser in length in its dimension as compared to a typical gold. 400 times lesser, which means in order to create a goldine, I wouldn't be requiring that much amount of gold, which is very costly, which makes production of goldine commercially viable. Commercially viable in nature. And to add on to that, goldine can be segregated into two words, gold and graphene. What is gold known for? Excellent chemical properties. It's non-reactive. So it won't get corroded easily. At the same time, it is structured in a fashion of graphene, which means it has excellent electrical properties. So that brings me to the next point. What is the application and significance? First is it can be used in the very blooming electronics industries. Electronics industry has been one of the pivotal industries, pivotal sectors taken up by Indian government these days. We have got a semiconductor mission. We have got a PLI schemes in electronics, and all of them can be accentuated with the help of goldine, right? Because it is commercially viable as well. So it can be used for industrial processes. It can be used in industrial purposes. Second, it can be used in chemical purposes as well. It can be used for creating a lot of compounds, a very difficult chemical compound for water purification process, for creation of hydrogen, which basically needs a very proper, very inert catalyst. So it can help us to create hydrogen. And creating hydrogen is also one of the Indian government agenda. So again, goldine can be used, right? It can also help us in water security because it can also provide us water purification. And all of this can be done in a very economic cost because this is a commercially viable material. So this was all about goldine.